Picture a quiet Polish town called Oświęcim in 1939. Families went about their daily lives, children played in the streets, and people could never have imagined that their hometown would soon become synonymous with one of humanity's darkest chapters. Within a year, the Nazis had renamed it Auschwitz, and what they built there would forever change how we understand evil itself. When we talk about Auschwitz today, we're not talking about a single camp. Most people don't realize that Auschwitz was actually a sprawling complex of terror that grew like a cancer across the Polish countryside. It started small in April 1940, but by the time it was liberated in January 1945, it had become a massive killing machine with dozens of satellite camps stretching across the region. The original camp, what historians call Auschwitz I, began almost quietly, if you can imagine such a thing. The Nazis initially used it to imprison Polish political prisoners and force them into brutal labor. This is where they housed their administrative headquarters, where SS officers lived and worked, managing what would become the largest center of genocide in human history. But this was just the beginning. About 2 miles away, something far more sinister was taking shape. In October 1941, construction began on what would become known as Auschwitz II, or Birkenau. If Auschwitz I was where the machinery of oppression was managed, Birkenau was where the Nazi plan to exterminate the Jewish people was carried out on an industrial scale. This wasn't just a prison camp anymore. This was a factory of death. Walking through Birkenau today, you can still see the remnants of what the Nazis built there. The gas chambers, the crematoria, the railway platform where cattle cars arrived day and night packed with human beings who had no idea what awaited them. Approximately 1 million Jews were murdered in this place. 1 million. That number is so vast, it becomes almost impossible to comprehend. But each one was a person with hopes, dreams, families, futures that were stolen from them. Birkenau housed different sections for men and women, but it also contained what the Nazis cynically called family camps. These were designated areas for Roma families deported from Germany and Austria, and for Jewish families from the Theresienstadt ghetto. The Nazis sometimes used these family camps for propaganda purposes, allowing Red Cross visits to show that families were being kept together. It was all a lie, of course. Most of these families were eventually sent to the gas chambers, but the horror didn't stop there. The Nazis had a third component to their Auschwitz system, known as Auschwitz III or Monowitz. This was where they perfected the concept of working people to death. Prisoners were forced to labor for German industrial companies, including the chemical giant IG Farben, which built a synthetic rubber plant nearby. The company knew exactly what kind of labor they were using. They knew these were human beings being worked to death, and they paid the SS for this slave labor. Eventually, the Auschwitz system grew to include around 44 subcamps scattered throughout the region. Each one was a node in a network of suffering that stretched across occupied Poland. Prisoners were shuffled between camps depending on the Nazis' needs, whether for labor, medical experiments, or extermination. What makes Auschwitz particularly haunting from a historical perspective is how meticulously the Nazis documented their crimes. These weren't random acts of violence carried out in chaos. This was bureaucratic murder, administered with German efficiency and recorded with German thoroughness. The SS kept detailed records of everything: personnel files, commandant orders, telegrams about prisoner escapes and deaths, punishment logs, medical files on prisoners subjected to horrific experiments. Today, These documents are preserved in the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum archives. There are 6 main categories of records from the camp's SS administration, covering everything from the commandant's office to the political police, from prisoner labor assignments to the economic administration that managed this vast enterprise of death. Even the camp hospitals, where Dr. Josef Mengele conducted his infamous medical experiments on twins and other prisoners, left behind detailed records. The archives hold around 650,000 individual prisoner records, compiled from about 70 different original document collections. Think about that for a moment. Each of those records represents a human being who was processed through this system of terror. The names, sometimes spelled incorrectly by SS clerks who couldn't be bothered to get them right. The dates of arrival, often the dates of death. These weren't just statistics to the Nazis. They were part of a grand plan they called the final solution to the Jewish question. Since 2000, researchers working with the Auschwitz Preservation Society have been digitizing these records, authenticating them, and making them available online. For families around the world still searching for information about relatives who disappeared during the Holocaust, these databases represent both hope and heartbreak. Hope that they might finally learn what happened to their loved ones, and heartbreak when they discover the truth. The scale of murder at Auschwitz is staggering. At least 1.1 million people were killed there, mostly Jews, but also large numbers of Poles, Roma, Soviet prisoners of war, and others deemed undesirable by Nazi ideology. But Auschwitz wasn't just about killing quickly. It was also about torture, medical experimentation, and the systematic dehumanization of entire populations. Dr. Josef Mengele, the Angel of Death, conducted his experiments primarily at Auschwitz I. He was particularly obsessed with twins, subjecting them to horrific procedures in the name of Nazi racial science. Survivors of his experiments remember him as a figure who could decide life or death with a casual gesture, sending people to the gas chambers or to his laboratory with equal indifference. When the Soviet army finally liberated Auschwitz on January 27, 1945, they found a landscape of horror that defied description. There were survivors, skeletal figures who had somehow endured years of starvation, disease, and brutality. The Polish Red Cross immediately established hospitals on the camp grounds to treat these liberated prisoners, and even those medical records survive today, testament to both the depths of Nazi cruelty and the resilience of the human spirit. What makes Auschwitz so significant in our understanding of the Holocaust isn't just the scale of murder that took place there, though that alone would be enough. It's how Auschwitz represents the Nazi system in microcosm. This wasn't random violence, or even traditional warfare. This was the application of modern industrial methods to the problem of killing human beings on a massive scale. The Nazis treated murder like a business, complete with efficiency studies, cost-benefit analyses, and meticulous record-keeping. The documentation that survives from Auschwitz is preserved not just in Poland, but in archives around the world. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum holds original camp records, including medical files and prisoner transfer lists. The National Archives in the United States and Europe maintain concentration camp records from World War II. These institutions work together to ensure that the evidence of what happened at Auschwitz is preserved, authenticated, and made available to researchers, educators, and anyone seeking to understand this period of history. Today, Auschwitz serves as more than just a memorial to those who died there. It's a warning about what human beings are capable of when hatred, prejudice, and indifference are allowed to flourish unchecked. The camp has been preserved as a museum, a place where visitors from around the world can see for themselves the infrastructure of genocide, the barracks where prisoners lived in inhuman conditions, the crematoria where bodies were burned, the railway platform where families were separated forever. But, perhaps most importantly, Auschwitz reminds us that this didn't happen in some distant, primitive time. This happened in the 20th century, carried out by educated people in an advanced industrial society. The doctors who conducted medical experiments were trained at prestigious universities. The bureaucrats who organized deportations were products of modern civil service systems. The engineers who designed the gas chambers were applying the latest technology to the problem of killing human beings efficiently. When we remember Auschwitz, we're not just honoring the memory of those who died there, though that's certainly important. We're also confronting uncomfortable truths about human nature and the fragility of civilization itself. The legacy of Auschwitz lives on not just in museums and archives, but in the responsibility each generation has to remember, to learn, and to ensure that such horrors are never repeated. Because if we've learned anything from studying these meticulously preserved records, it's that genocide doesn't happen overnight. It happens step by step, decision by decision, when good people remain silent and evil is allowed to flourish. That's why places like Auschwitz matter. That's why we preserve the records, maintain the sites, and tell these stories, no matter how difficult they are to hear. Because remembering isn't just about honoring the past. It's about protecting the future.